Many male survivors are haunted by one question. And so they're afraid to say it out loud. And that is, if my body reacted, what does that say about me? Now, if sexual responses during or after abuse still confuse or disturb you, this video is going to help explain what was happening in your body without turning it into a verdict about who you are. All right, guys, let's name something that almost no one explains. I'm going to say clearly to men, at least the guys that come to me to the coaching program. And that is that sexual arousal is a body response. It's not a decision. And when that response shows up during abuse, during coercion, or fear, it actually creates confusion that can last for decades. Now, men often, when I'm working with them, they'll describe it something like this. My body reacted even though I didn't want it to, or I didn't want it. I froze, but there was still arousal, or I felt disgusted afterwards, or I've never been able to actually reconcile that. And because no one explained this properly, many male survivors, many men reached the same conclusion. And that conclusion was something must be wrong with me. Now, that conclusion is understandable, but it's also incorrect. So before we talk about meaning, we have to talk about mechanics because bodies don't work in a way that most people actually think that they actually do. All right, so I'm going to introduce Daniel, and we've talked about Daniel before, but remember, Daniel represents a composite. So Daniel isn't just one person, even though he is, but he represents many men that I've actually worked with before that actually come in with this same issue. So Daniel actually avoided talking about sex in his therapy sessions. And not because he was ashamed of desire, but because he was confused about his body. And so when he entered the coaching program, first what we did was we built safety. And then once we built safety, he actually began sharing. So Daniel remembers moments from his childhood where his body responded, where his mind was just terrified, his emotions just shut down. So here he was years later, and guess what? That confusion still followed him. He didn't question what happened, but he actually questioned himself. Now, listen, if your body response still feels like it's evidence against you, I need you to hang with me. I need you to stay with me because we need to separate the physiology from interpretation. All right. So here's the part I think that most people, most men never get explained to them. And that is that sexual arousal is governed by the ANS, or the autonomic nervous system. And so that system responds to stimulation, it responds to novelty, it responds to intensity, it responds actually to fear, and it also responds to power dynamics. So arousal can occur actually without desire, without consent, and without pleasure. This is an opinion, it's physiology. So Daniel's body didn't choose anything, it just simply reacted. Now, if that contradicts what you kind of thought about arousal, then that's the point. So now let's talk a little bit about why fear and arousal can actually coexist. So fear and arousal share what we call overlapping pathways in the nervous system. So both, let me get some water here because my throat is going. So both involved increased heart rate, heightened sensation, focused attention, and loss of voluntary control. So when threat and stimulation occur together, the body doesn't stop responding. Actually, what it does, it cross fires. So for Daniel, this created a terrifying mismatch. So his body reacted, his mind wanted escaped, and his emotions actually they shut down, they went offline. And so that mismatch doesn't mean consent, it means the whole system is just overloaded. So this is where I'm going to say a lot of guys actually get stuck because no one explained what comes next, what comes next after that overload. So after the body reacts, the mind is now looking for meaning. So with Daniel, he would even start asking these questions. Well, why did my body do that? Does that mean that I wanted it? Does that say something about who I am, my identity? So without accurate information, shame comes and it fills in the gap. Not usually immediately, but usually over time. So every memory that replays, it reinforces that same thought. I can't trust myself. And so this is how physiology gets misinterpreted as identity. Now, if this confusion followed you into adulthood, this next part really matters. And that's because the effects don't stop in childhood. And so in adulthood, unresolved arousal confusion can show up as sexual avoidance. It can show up as compulsive sexual behavior. It can show up as performance anxiety or even dissociation during intimacy, like you're just not there. You might be there physically, but you're not there. Or even the fear of being found out. And so Daniel actually noticed for him that during sex, his body reacted, his mind checked out, and then afterwards, whew, the shame just came right back in that it returned. Not because sex was wrong, but because his body still felt untrustworthy. All right, guys. So we got to talk about the reframe, right? Because here's the reframe that changes everything about this experience. So hear me. A sexual response is a reflex, not a statement. It carries no meaning by itself and of itself. Now, that may sound simple, but for many men, this distinction was never offered. So instead, they were left to interpret a body event as a moral verdict. So Daniel didn't walk away from abuse asking, well, what happened to me? Or he walked away asking, well, what does this say about me? Okay, what is my identity? That question alone can keep men stuck, and it does for decades. So once you separate, I'm going to say response from meaning, the confusion actually starts to loosen a little bit. So now let's just talk a little bit why the body actually keeps remembering. Now, here's another piece that most men are never told. And that is, remember we talked about that automatic nervous system? The nervous system remembers patterns, not stories. Okay, it remembers patterns, not stories. So when intense stimulation happens, especially during fear, during power imbalance, or freeze, the body records the sensation. Now, not as desire, not as consent, but simply as data, simply as information. So later, when you have a similar sensation, similar image, or context that actually activate that same response. And so Daniel experienced this as sudden arousal without conscious interest, or he would have intrusive sensations, or he would have confusion actually during intimacy. Now, this doesn't mean that the body actually wanted the past. It means that the body learned associations under extreme conditions. Now, this is where many guys actually panic when they come in, and we start talking about this in the modules and in the group coaching sessions. And that's because they assume that memory equals desires. Okay. Memories don't ask permission. So it fires based on similarity. So that's why a smell can trigger an emotion maybe for you. That's why maybe a sound triggers fear. I mean, I experience this myself still when I hear a car door slam. Right, it's quick, and I've been able to work through it, but Sometimes it still does. Or maybe a touch actually triggers a sensation. And so sexual memory works actually the same way. So Daniel noticed that when arousal appeared unexpectedly, shame followed immediately. Not because the response was wrong, but because the interpretation was. And so the body wasn't reenacting desire, it was replaying that stored sensation. All right. So this is why trying to actually control the arousal sometimes actually makes it worse. And let's be clear, oftentimes it just doesn't really help that much. Well, that's because many men they try to fix it by forcing the arousal away, or they're over monitoring their bodies, or they're analyzing every response, and they're testing themselves mentally. Well, for Daniel, what happened for him, this actually led to more anxiety for him, increased association, not being there, and then just reinforce the shame because he was trying to outthink the physiology. And like I said, oftentimes that just actually doesn't work because arousal isn't always cognitive, but reflexive. All right. So what actually helps? What did we do? How did we try and help him in the program? Not exposure, not reliving, but actually understanding. So, healing, I'm going to say, in this area doesn't require reliving the events, but it does require accurate interpretation. So, for Daniel, when he was in the program, the progress came when he stopped treating the response as evidence. Remember, it's just information. And so we taught him, he learned how his body actually worked, and he allowed sensation without actually assigning it meaning. And so that allowed him to actually stay present instead of actually panicking. And so over time, guess what? Those responses softened. Not because, he was there fighting them, but because they were no longer actually threatening to him. This is where we're talking about the safety and why it's so important to introduce that first. And so understanding actually helped to reinduce. I'm going to say reduce the intensity. Yeah, it reduced the intensity. All right. So this brings us, of course, to our entry point. And you guys already know where I'm going with this if you've been watching this series, Life by Your Design. That is the entryway into the program. And why? Because in it, what you're going to start learning, just like Daniel did, is that when we talk about life by your design, it doesn't pathologize the sexual responses. It actually helps you to understand your body without judgment, to separate reflex from identity, and to reduce shame through clarity so that you can rebuild your trust in your own physiology, in your own body, right? And so we don't have to go around, digging into memories and labeling you because it's not about labeling you, but by explaining what your body did and why. So let me leave you with this something to think about. Your body responding did not mean that you wanted it. It did not mean that you consented, and it does not define who you are. But it does mean that your nervous system reacted under conditions that no child should face. And when understanding replaces interpretation, guess what? Shame starts to lose its grip. So you don't need to fix your body. You need to stop accusing it. All right? We'll see you next week.